I want to start today with a single uncomfortable question that has been sitting in my mind ever since I rewatched Avengers Endgame late at night. Be ready, because I want to say that Tony Stark is a Doctor Doom. Not our Tony from Endgame, but Tony from 2014, from where Thanos actually came. When I look closely, Endgame does not just end the saga. It quietly fractures reality in a way the movie never fully admits. I noticed something unsettling about the Thanos who dies in the final battle. That Thanos is not the one shaped by Infinity War. He is a version pulled violently from 2004, a timeline where the Avengers have not yet failed, where the stones have not yet been gathered, and where the universe has not yet learned fear. When that Thanos turns to dust, an entire future collapses with him. No snap. No half-universe mourning. No cosmic lesson learned through loss. And I keep asking myself, if that future never happens, what fills the vacuum instead? Marvel tells us timelines branch, realities multiply, and consequences ripple outward. But sometimes the most dangerous outcomes are the ones nobody is watching. Especially when heroes assume their victory cleaned up every mess they made. That unanswered absence is the crack where something far darker than a purple warlord could eventually crawl through, unnoticed, unchallenged, and born from the Avengers' own success in a universe that believes itself safe. The more I think about it, the more I realize that killing Thanos in the past is not heroic closure. It is narrative abandonment. That 2014 timeline is left without its destined catastrophe, and without catastrophe, there is no forced evolution. I noticed how Marvel often frames suffering as a catalyst. Tony becomes Iron Man through trauma. Thor grows through loss. Even humanity unites because something terrible threatens it. Now imagine a universe that never experiences Infinity War, never watches heroes lose, never sees half of life vanish. That universe keeps moving forward, technologically advancing, politically shifting, but without the pressure that once kept arrogance in check. I think that is where the danger truly begins. A timeline without Thanos does not become peaceful by default. It becomes complacent. Power structures remain unchallenged. Weapons continue to be built without the moral reckoning of failure. And the Avengers in that reality never disband, never fracture, never learn humility through defeat. They win every battle that comes their way because the worst one never arrives. When I follow that logic, I start to feel uneasy because history tells us that unchecked victory breeds something far more dangerous than loss. It breeds certainty. And certainty is the soil where tyrants grow, not because they fear destruction, but because they believe they deserve control. That 2014 reality is not a paradise. It is a pressure cooker slowly sealing itself shut, while everyone inside believes the fire has already been extinguished. There is a moment in Endgame that feels small on the surface, but becomes massive the more I examine it. The conversation with Ancient One is presented as a neat explanation of branching timelines, glowing lines splitting cleanly when stones are removed. But I notice something she never addresses directly. She talks about missing Infinity Stones destabilizing reality, yet says nothing about removing people who are meant to shape history. Thanos is not a side character. He is a universal constant in that timeline's future. Removing him is not a branch, it is an amputation. A reality missing its inevitable villain is forced to invent a new one. And unlike Thanos, this new threat would not come from the shadows of space. It would rise from within civilization itself. I think Marvel intentionally glosses over this because the implications are terrifying. That timeline does not get pruned on screen. It does not collapse. It keeps going. Somewhere out there, a universe exists where heroes never learn restraint through failure, where scientists keep pushing limits because nothing ever punished them for crossing lines, where the idea of sacrifice becomes theoretical instead of lived. And when power grows without resistance, morality slowly turns into a suggestion rather than a rule. That leads me to the organization that supposedly exists to prevent exactly this kind of chaos, the Time Variance Authority. I keep asking myself why they never stepped in. If the TVA prunes timelines that deviate too far, then why allow a reality where Thanos is erased years before his destined role? Some people argue it was part of the sacred timeline, but that explanation feels hollow the longer I sit with it. Because this deviation is not subtle. It is monumental. Entire wars never happen. Entire ideologies never form. Billions of deaths never scar the universe into maturity. I think the silence of the TVA is not an oversight. It is a clue. Either they could not intervene, or they chose not to. And both options are terrifying. If they could not, then something in that timeline is powerful enough to shield itself from pruning. If they chose not to, then they saw value in letting this reality continue, perhaps because what emerges from it serves a greater, darker purpose. The TVA's absence tells me that this timeline is not broken in their eyes. It is useful. And that suggests the future of that world is not meant to be saved, but harvested. When I imagine that future, my thoughts always circle back to one man, Tony Stark. In the Prime timeline, Tony is shaped by failure, guilt, and the knowledge that he was never enough. Infinity War breaks him. The snap humbles him. But in a world without Thanos, Tony never faces that reckoning. His inventions keep working. His armor keeps improving. His solutions keep succeeding. And I think success without consequence is the most dangerous drug Tony Stark could ever consume. This is a man who already flirted with authoritarian solutions, from Ultron to global defense systems. Those ideas only stopped because they backfired. Now remove the backfire. Remove the cosmic punishment. Let Tony's logic keep winning. I noticed how close he already was to believing he alone could protect the world. In a timeline where he is never proven wrong on a universal scale, that belief hardens into doctrine. Tony does not need to become evil overnight. He just needs to keep being right long enough that nobody questions him. That is how heroes transform into rulers, and rulers into something far worse, all while believing they are still saving everyone. This is where the shadow of Dr. Doom begins to loom in my mind, not as a sudden reveal, but as an inevitable evolution. I'm not saying Tony wakes up one day wearing a green cloak. I am saying the philosophy of doom, control through intellect, order through dominance, is already present within Tony's worst instincts. A world without Thanos never learns to fear unchecked genius. Instead, it worships it. And when people worship intelligence without questioning its morality, they willingly surrender freedom for security. I think this is why that timeline is allowed to exist. It does not produce chaos immediately. It produces order. Perfect, efficient, terrifying order. And the scariest villains are never born from destruction. They are born from solutions that work too well. Somewhere in that untouched 2014 reality, a line is being crossed slowly, quietly, with applause instead of resistance. And by the time anyone realizes what that world is becoming, it will already be too late to stop it without another catastrophe. The genius of Endgame is that it presents victory as final, but the truth is far messier. I noticed how the film treats time travel like a surgical tool, precise and clean, when in reality it behaves more like radiation, invisible damage spreading long after the explosion. That abandoned timeline is radioactive with possibility. Every decision made there compounds differently. Without the snap, governments never fracture under loss. Without loss, militarization accelerates. Without cosmic fear, Earth becomes arrogant. And arrogance invites conquest, not from aliens but from itself. I think Marvel planted this seed deliberately, knowing they could return to it later when the audience is ready to confront a darker idea, that sometimes heroes create their own villains by winning too thoroughly. This is not about blaming the Avengers. It is about acknowledging that even the best intentions can rot when left unchallenged. That timeline is not screaming for attention yet. It is quietly growing. evolving, sharpening its intellect and its resolve, preparing something that does not see itself as a conqueror, but as a necessary correction to a flawed multiverse. What makes this theory so unsettling to me is how invisible the threat remains. There is no snap, no explosion, no dramatic warning, just progress. I imagine a future where that universe looks at others and sees chaos, inefficiency, suffering, and decides intervention is mercy. That is how Doom thinks. That is how tyrants justify themselves. And if that reality ever collides with ours, it will not arrive as a villain. It will arrive as a solution. That is the true consequence of killing Thanos early. Not peace, but the birth of something that believes peace must be enforced. As I connect these dots, I realize Endgame did not close the book on destiny. It tore out a chapter and left the story bleeding in the margins, waiting for the moment when someone finally reads what was written there all along. When I let that idea sit long enough, another realization slowly creeps in, and it is far more disturbing than the absence of Thanos. A universe without its defining trauma does not just drift aimlessly, it starts rewriting the rules of morality itself. I think that 2014 reality would eventually look at the multiverse and see something fundamentally wrong with it. Countless timelines, collapsing, branching, colliding, endlessly repeating the same mistakes. From the outside, it would look inefficient, wasteful, broken. And from the inside of a perfectly managed world, intervention would not feel like tyranny. It would feel like responsibility. That is the mindset that scares me the most because it is not fueled by rage or conquest, but by cold logic. When logic becomes detached from empathy, it justifies anything. That is how a protector convinces himself that domination is salvation. The Avengers of that timeline would not see themselves as villains either. They would see themselves as caretakers of reality, fixing what lesser worlds keep destroying. And once that belief takes hold, the step from hero to God becomes alarmingly small, almost invisible, because nobody is screaming that something is wrong yet. This is where the multiverse narrative starts to align with something Marvel has been quietly building toward for years. Control, oversight, authority. We saw fragments of it with the TVA, with Kang variants, with incursions threatening entire universes. I think this abandoned timeline becomes the missing puzzle piece that explains why a threat like Doom does not need magic alone or technology alone, but a philosophy strong enough to challenge the idea of free will across realities. In that world, innovation never stops. Tony Stark never steps back. His mind keeps evolving faster than his conscience because nothing ever forces him to pause. I imagine him creating systems not just to protect Earth, but to predict behavior, to prevent conflict before it happens, to eliminate variables that could lead to war. At first, people thank him, then they depend on him. Then they fear living without his systems. And by the time they realize their choices are being quietly removed, they no longer remember how to choose. That is not an evil plan. That is a successful one. What fascinates me is how perfectly this ties into the idea of Avengers Doomsday without needing a random new villain dropped from nowhere. Doom does not have to arrive from Latveria as a stranger. Doom can be the logical end of a hero's journey that never learned humility. A Tony Stark who never lost Peter Parker, never watched the universe crumble, never sat broken in space thinking he failed everyone, would never develop the emotional breaks that saved him in the prime timeline. Instead, his grief is replaced by confidence. His doubt is replaced by data. His humanity is replaced by results. And when someone like that looks at the multiverse, with its endless suffering and repeating catastrophes, the conclusion becomes inevitable. Someone has to be in charge. Someone intelligent enough. Someone proven enough. Someone who has always been right. At this point, the TVA's silence starts making more sense to me. What if that timeline is not a mistake but a contingency? What if the multiverse itself needs a balancing force, not one driven by chaos like Thanos, but by order? The TVA was built to preserve a single sacred flow, but we already know that system collapsed. Once infinite timelines exist, chaos is guaranteed. And chaos eventually invites order in its most extreme form. I think Doom represents the multiverse correcting itself, not through destruction, but through consolidation. A single will-imposing structure where randomness reigns. And that is why pruning never came. That timeline was allowed to grow because it was always meant to become something else. Something necessary. Something terrifyingly rational. Imagine the moment when that universe becomes aware of others. Not through magic portals or accidental incursions, but through deliberate observation. Tony's technology-piercing dimensional barriers, mapping realities, cataloging their failures. He would see universes destroyed by emotional decisions, heroes choosing sacrifice over strategy, villains born from neglect and chaos. And every time he observes, his certainty grows. He would not hate these worlds. He would pity them. Pity is far more dangerous than hatred because it convinces you that others need to be saved from themselves. That is Doom's core belief. Not conquest for ego, but control for stability. And once that belief solidifies, the armor becomes less Iron Man and more something else entirely. Not a symbol of protection, but of authority. This also reframes the idea of Avengers Doomsday in a way that feels deeply personal. The Avengers would not be facing an alien warlord or a cosmic entity. They would be facing the consequence of their own victory, a reflection of what happens when heroism is never questioned. The enemy would know their tactics, their weaknesses, their emotional triggers, because he would be built from the same foundation. Same brilliance, same intentions, different outcomes. And that makes the conflict far more tragic than any battle with Thanos ever was. Because you cannot punch philosophy into submission. You cannot snap away an idea. You have to confront it. And that means confronting the uncomfortable truth that maybe some part of it makes sense. I keep coming back to one chilling thought. What if that version of Tony Stark genuinely believes he is doing what our Tony died for? Protecting everyone, saving the future, ending the cycle of loss. From his perspective, our universe is the broken one, constantly flirting with annihilation because it refuses to impose lasting order. That makes Doom not a madman, but a mirror. And mirrors are terrifying because they show us what we could become under slightly different circumstances. Avengers Doomsday would not just be a physical war. It would be an ideological collision between freedom and security, choice and control, chaos and order. And neither side would be entirely wrong. As the multiverse saga moves forward, this theory feels less like speculation and more like an inevitability. Marvel has always used its villains to challenge the heroes' beliefs, not just their strength. Thanos challenged sacrifice. Doom challenges autonomy. And the most haunting part is that the Avengers themselves created the conditions for his rise by rewriting time without fully understanding the cost. Endgame was never the end. It was the beginning of a far more complex moral crisis. One where saving the universe once may have doomed countless others to a future where freedom is optional and peace is enforced. When I step back and look at the entire picture, the irony is almost poetic. Thanos believed in balance through destruction. Doom believes in balance through control. Both are wrong, but both emerge because the universe keeps swinging between extremes. The Avengers stopped one extreme and unknowingly paved the road for the other. And that is what makes this story so powerful. Not because of explosions or cameos, but because it asks a question with no easy answer. How much control is too much, and how much freedom is worth the risk of annihilation? Avengers Doomsday, if this theory holds true, will not give us a villain to hate. It will give us a dilemma to wrestle with. And that is why I think this is the most dangerous timeline Marvel has ever created. Not because it is violent, but because it is calm. Not because it is chaotic, but because it is efficient. A world without Thanos did not become safe. It became confident. And confidence, when left unchecked, is how gods are born. The Avengers may soon face a threat that does not want to destroy them, but to replace them, to correct them, to finish what they started in Endgame, in the name of a future where no one ever has to lose again, even if it means no one is ever truly free. If this theory excites you, unsettles you, or makes you see Endgame differently, make sure you like the video, share it with someone who loves Marvel theories, and subscribe for more deep breakdowns like this.